Approximately 10 years ago, I was a first responder with the sheriff's office, and we received a call about a person in the front yard that was acting erratically and suspiciously. I was not the first unit to arrive on scene, but when I was listening to my radio, I recognized the address. And to my surprise, it was actually a girl I was dating at the time's residence. So I knew the people that were living there, and that possibly one of the people or two of the people there were autistic and could be the people they were talking about on the radio. Fortunately, when I arrived, it was my girlfriend's nephew who was autistic and had Fragile X syndrome. And he was the one that someone had called about that it was acting strangely. What had happened was the person that drove by saw my nephew, who was upset at the time because he wasn't allowed to watch a certain show, and became very angry and upset and was out in the front yard pacing around, waving his arms. And to most people, they would think that that person might have been on some kind of drugs or could have been a domestic issue. And the arriving units that arrived there first immediately thought something was going on and were about to arrest him and about to use hands on force to put him to the ground. And that's where I came in. And I immediately recognized who he was and that he wasn't a person that was on drugs or was in a domestic issue. And I was able to talk to him and was immediately able to calm him down and explain to all the responding units what had took place. And after this incident, it made me realize that we need to understand a better way of dealing with people with nonverbal issues. And my girlfriend, who's my wife now, realized the same thing, and she began to try to get resources started for first responders, for law enforcement units, for EMTs, medical personnel, teachers, to have a better understanding of nonverbal cues or nonverbal behavior in young adults or children. I was able to attend a class called Crisis Intervention Training in my state in Georgia. It was put on by the Georgia Bureau of Investigation to recognize that maybe certain behaviors were not an indication of a person that was on drugs or was violent, but could be some kind of condition that they were experiencing or some kind of trauma they're experiencing. And we had to step back and understand that before maybe making a decision to arrest them or to use force on them. And it was a great class. It was a great training period. And it made me realize that we all need to have this kind of training. So, when I speak about nonverbal communication with certain people, I want to focus today on autism and a condition called Fragile X syndrome. My wife has a son. His name is Hunter, and he has Fragile X syndrome with autism. Now, some of you who don't realize what Fragile X syndrome is a condition where it's on a genetic level, and I don't want to get too technical on it, but it affects the Y and X chromosomes of a male and female. And actually, with the X chromosome, it affects that little part that makes it from a Y to an X, which affects the male. And it brings on certain conditions as physical features where a person with Fragile X has elongated face, prominent forehead, nose, and of course, some of the behavioral symptoms are they are nonverbal, they flap their arms. Hunter, my wife's son, he has a severe case of Fragile X syndrome where he is nonverbal. He has been diagnosed with the mental capacity of no more than a pre-K. You can talk to him and he will respond to you, but he responds to you in one words and certain verbal cues that you might not understand. But he also has autism. My wife also has a nephew who has Fragile X syndrome, but he does not have autism. You can come up to him and you can speak to him. You can have a pretty simple conversation. He can understand you, but he still has these nonverbal cues of getting angry, getting aggressive. But when I talk about people with these nonverbal cues when it comes to Fragile X syndrome, these aggressive behaviors are not because they want to hurt you. It's because they have no other way to display their feelings of anger or upset. So that's one of the reasons, or one of the points that I want to put out for when it comes to dealing with nonverbal people. Now, Hunter with autism, of course, he is, like I said before, nonverbal. So we have to understand that we might encounter, as first responders, we might come into a residence, to a business where someone might see a person displaying nonverbal cues as walking around, saying one words, flapping their arms, screaming, or what I call squealing, a high-pitched squeal. They do not respond to anybody. A person or employee might come up to them and ask them what's wrong. Of course, a nonverbal person is not going to respond to them, and then they might make the assumption that this person might be on some type of drugs or might be going through some kind of emotional issues, and then will call 911, and that's when the first responders will come on scene. So when we recognize these nonverbal cues, such as I said before, we might have to step back and say, hey, wait a minute. This person might be autistic. They might have Fragile X syndrome. This person might be going through an emotional episode, maybe PTSD. And then we can go from there as far as maybe a de-escalation, or maybe trying to contact family members or someone who is better trained, as in the CIT, the Crisis Intervention Training, and bring them on scene, and we can better deal with them. I see so many cases on the media where first responders are immediately forced to react to a person's behavior, and then later they find out that this person wasn't aggressive. It was because they're autistic or they were nonverbal, and maybe could have been handled better. That brings me a story of, in my state of Georgia, home state of Georgia, we have a coastal town called Tybee Island, and I read in the newspaper that there was a person who was acting aggressively outside a bar, and the police were called. The police were trying to talk to the person. The person was not responding to them, as I said before, becoming very aggressive. He was making movements with his arms, screaming. So the officers on scene deployed a taser device and took him to the ground. Later, they found out that this person was autistic and was trying to locate a family member, from what I can remember, and that's why he was upset. Of course, it got a lot of negative portrayal in the media about what had took place, and it just reinforced my beliefs of how important it is for first responders to have this kind of training, to recognize that the people that they might encounter could be a nonverbal person with autism, Fragile X, and some other kind of medical condition which prevents them to properly convey their feelings to the first responders. My wife and I, more credit to my wife, she was able to establish a training class for first responders, and she actually put it on for the law enforcement agencies, for the medical personnel, about recognizing certain nonverbal behaviors and that they could lead to a conclusion this person was autistic or Fragile X symptoms. So she was able to do that. My state of Georgia had the crisis intervention training. It covered a broad spectrum of not only nonverbal training when it comes to autistic people, but also with people dealing with post-traumatic stress syndrome, from veterans coming back from the conflicts overseas. It was a great class, and that was a great tool that my state provided for all first responders for the state. And on a local level, my wife's class, providing training for local first responders. And I really hope that this can further branch out to other communities and to other states, of recognizing the importance of encountering people with nonverbal behavior nonverbal communications and have an understanding and become more compassionate about responding to their needs. That is my goal for today. Hopefully, I was able to convey that to the class. And have a good day, and God bless.